At the same time, I became very aware that I had died. Not just that I had died, but that I had died again. I realized that this was a repeated experience for me, and I was disappointed with myself that I hadn't remembered that this would happen. Welcome to Let's Lift the Veil. If these testimonies touch you, help us spread the word. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every interaction helps these extraordinary voices be heard by as many people as possible. Keep sharing the light. Stay curious. Stay open. Let's lift the veil together. This experience happened to me almost 40 years ago, in 1985, and I was 19. I have always had severe asthma. My chest had not been good, and it began to tighten suddenly one evening before Christmas at home. I became very distressed. There was a heavy weight, like a stone, on my chest. I forced myself to keep breathing for as long as I could, but the pain became too great. Finally, I very consciously gave up. Once I stopped breathing, the pain immediately ceased. My consciousness lifted into my head, and I remember thinking, well, that's it then, that's been my go. I was surprised how calm I felt. I remember thinking, reaching the end and feeling no pain at all, nature thinks of everything. Then I noticed tiny red sparks in front of my mind. After this, the mind seemed to flash like an old TV screen, alternating black then white. None of this affected my thinking processes at all. They were as clear as they ever had been, if not more so. But I knew that at some point I would stop thinking and I would simply die. But that is not what happened. Instead, suddenly, like a jack-in-the-box, I leapt out of the top of my head. I noticed my body sprawled on the floor. I didn't know how it got there, because I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, and I found it repellent to look at. Dead bodies are repellent to the dead, as well as to the living, clearly. I scrambled upwards, and I found myself in a velvety, warm, black space. I felt that I had the same shape as before. I also felt really well. I'd always had health problems, so it was good to feel wholly unencumbered by illness and physical restrictions. However, I was a little bothered at the thought of spending eternity in a warm black space, alone. Then a point of light began to brighten in the distance, and I was drawn towards it. The light became bigger and brighter. The gray expanding tunnel experience you will have read about describes it accurately. Or Hieronymus Bosch's astonishingly accurate picture. The intense light felt like a conscious presence, not just light, but a living, divine being. What a joy! At the same time, I became very aware that I had died. Not just that I had died, but that I had died again. I realized that this was a repeated experience for me, and I was disappointed with myself that I hadn't remembered that this would happen. I knew this experience very well, and I knew I had died before, many times. I was also disappointed with myself that, being young, I had not made use of my life yet, or done anything with it, and now it had gone. I had a feeling of a wasted opportunity, and I felt that it was quite difficult to get a physical life on earth. There was also the feeling that I had actually killed myself, which I had not. Obviously, it was asthma. But I knew that the real culprit behind it all was me. I was keenly aware that in the life that appeared to have just finished, I had reached a psychological dead end, as it were. So I had decided to die. A perpetuation of the same personality patterns would have achieved very little. I was also made aware that everything that had happened to me in my life had somehow been caused by me. every bad and good experience, every relationship, and every difficulty I had faced, in reality, had been given to me by myself, in some mysterious way. God had not done it. I had done my life to myself. This was presented simply in a very objective, non-judgmental way. It was just the way things were. It reminds me now of the statement by Maitreya, in The Laws of Life, by Benjamin Creme, at page 63. Whatever is in front of you, around you, rest assured its roots are within you. Creation is within you. The roots of objectivity are in subjectivity, and that subjectivity is you. Then I became bothered, that I was in an unfamiliar place. I wondered who I should pray to, since the situation seemed to be as dire as a dire situation could be, especially as I was conscious that I had not actually ended when I died. But should I pray to Buddha, Jesus, or Muhammad? Which one was the right one? I decided that I would pray to God and He would have to work it all out for me. I began to meditate profoundly and desperately, as though my life depended on it, certainly as though my future depended on it. I flew further up, and I refused to acknowledge anything that distracted my attention. I felt it was important to cut everything away, every identification and everything I had been. Everything was a delusion, if it smacked of duality. I am not sure where any of these ideas came from. I was not, and still am not, a traditional religious person, and I had never studied religion or the concept of duality. In fact, I rather disliked religion. But I was very conscious that I must not be distracted, and I must give away everything, everything I loved and cared for, every grudge, bitterness, and resentment. Everything had to be dropped. There must be no identification with anything. Two spirits tried to greet me, and they encouraged me to calm down. By the way, all communication at this point was telepathic. I remember asking them if one of my favorite authors, Charles Dickens, was truly a great writer. I was a keen literature student. They answered yes, but they said Dickens wrote as though his characters were separate from himself. Then I began to feel that I had become distracted, so I drew myself away from them. They watched me go up. I imagined them shaking their heads behind me. At this point, the huge light of a great being appeared in front of me, and my sense of duality wholly ceased. Everything you will have read about an entity of light, love, and joy absolutely agrees with my own experience. As an aside, nothing comes with a label in any of this. Krishnamurti's line, "The word is not the thing," is absolutely right, it seems to me. Therefore you must read this account as my own effortful attempt to describe something that is very difficult to put into words. All I would say is that I did not think that this being was God or Jesus. In fact, it seemed to be so overwhelmingly delighted to see me again that I have since come to think that this was possibly my own soul. There was such a feeling of energetic personal familiarity about it, and this being was so overflowing with joy to see me that I think it could only have been a better aspect of myself, because nobody else would be that bothered. In the face of this unconditional love, I asked this being if he would give the same experience to a wicked person like Hitler, and this amused him quite a bit. He replied, "Yes, of course, anyone who wants it." But I suspected the implication was that a person like Hitler would not really want an experience like this. Then the soul, if that is what it was, took me into itself. My lower ordinary consciousness expanded and merged wholly into this being. For a few moments, I forgot my own narrow personality and I became one with it. The being had a quality of enormous but particular individuality. It was a quality that I wholly recognized and identified with, yet it was not separate from anything. I felt like it was deathless, that it had never been born and could never die, and it was the essence of meaning. I felt as though I was experiencing the heart of the true self. The experience was astonishing, a concentration of boundless love, wonderful intelligence, and profound purpose. Shortly after this, I became aware of a red light in some part of the being. So far, all had been joy, laughter, and golden light. Now I became aware of a rather more serious red light. This red light or ray seemed to be connected to the earth, almost like an umbilical cord bringing an awareness of suffering. It also seemed to be full of self-sacrifice. I became acutely aware that I could not yet do this extreme quality of self-sacrifice and compassion towards human suffering. It was at this point that I separated from the being and contracted somewhat back into my more normal identity. Moving away, I seemed to be presented with a reflection of the activity of my mind, or my inward state. It was like a scribbled, luminous line, almost like a line you might see on a hospital monitor, and the line reacted to my inward state with tremendous sensitivity. I saw that if I calmed my inner state, the line settled down. Equally, if I let go, the line went into scribbled chaos, and it was very difficult to get it back under control. It seemed to be important for me to recognize that I could control the line. The aim was not to achieve a perfectly flat line, but to be in charge of my inward state. I realized that my inner state had been very disordered and chaotic. Then finally, I saw the earth as a great round ball in front of me, as though I were in space. Around the globe, there was a rose-pink colored light which seemed to be the expression of a truly giant being. It was as though he had his arms around the earth, bathing it in a protective layer of love. I immediately asked, "Is this Jesus?" At this point, the giant being seemed to pulse in one specific location at the mention of this name. It was clear to me that Jesus was greatly beloved by the being. He was regarded as a very great servant, and he was adored. But I also felt that they were not identical. I'm really afraid words do fail at this point. I then asked, what would be the most important thing for me to do with my life? After a brief pause, I got the answer that it would be to make known the appearance of the Christ. This was very alarming to me as I was not a Christian. I wasn't sure what to do with that. A few years later, in my early 20s, I came across Benjamin Cream's information. It seemed to me to be correct. But I'm afraid that I did not have it in me to make known the reappearance of the Christ, so I forgot it wholly. Then a few years later, when I was about 26, I woke up one morning with Benjamin Cream's name in my mind, and I immediately ordered the book. Slowly, I became involved with the reappearance group. However, I have to say that I am still a bit reticent and embarrassed about talking about the reappearance of the Christ, except to other people in this group. Back to the last part of the experience, it began now to dawn on me that I had actually died. I thought back to people who would really miss me, like my brother, father, and mother. I thought that my father and brother would get over it, but I realized that my mother would never recover. I could not believe I had the power to cause such suffering. I began to plead profoundly to go back, but I had no personal desire to go back. The place where I was felt like home, and it felt much more real and solid than my other life on earth, and at the same time, I did not want to hurt my mom. Immediately, I began to plunge down. I woke up, I was back in my body, and I found myself being maneuvered through the front door on a stretcher into an ambulance. Given our distance from the local hospital, I would say I must have been away for at least 10 to 15 minutes. I would like to say that afterwards all went swimmingly well, but I'm afraid I was terribly depressed for many years. It is not flattering to see oneself as one really is, There seemed to me a chasm between the soul, or whatever it was, and the miserable, narrow personality I had made for it, and it made me felt like a profound failure. It also seemed to me that my ambition was wrong. How can one trample on others if we are one with all? Looking back, I was probably rather harsh on myself. However, one hopes that possibly some progress has been made over the past turbulent 40 years. My life, behind the veil. Since that life-changing experience, my perception of existence, death, and myself has been profoundly altered. What I went through gave me an unshakable inner certainty that consciousness does not end with the body. I've never looked at earthly life the same way since. It's become impossible for me to believe that our existence stops with biological death. There is a continuity, an invisible but very real thread, and that changes everything. What transformed me most was the deep insight that, on some inner level, we are responsible for what happens in our lives. Not in a guilt-ridden way, but as if we, behind the veil of ordinary awareness, choose the lessons, people, and events we encounter. This has left me with a mix of humility and responsibility. For years I was harsh with myself after the experience, realizing how out of alignment my life had been with who I really am. But now I try to live with more integrity, seeking to reconnect with a part of me I glimpsed there, an infinitely loving, joyful, and wise self. I haven't adopted any formal religion, but I've become deeply engaged in spiritual exploration. Meditation became a constant companion in my inner search, and some esoteric writings resonated deeply with what I had encountered on the other side. The experience gave me a heightened awareness of the unity of all life. Love, as I felt it there, goes far beyond what we usually know. It's not just emotion, it's the foundational force, the very essence of what we are. Even after all these years, this experience remains my inner compass. It reminds me that beyond appearances, something deeply real connects us all, and that life, even in its hardest moments, is a rare gift to be honored. Thank you for listening to this near-death experience. If this story moved you, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing it. It's a small action for you, but it means the world to this growing channel. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next journey beyond the veil. Every click helps us give voice to these powerful stories. Take care of yourself and those you love. Until next time, keep sharing the light. Stay curious, stay open. Let's lift the veil together.